Going to go ahead and call the September 7th, 2021 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Casey, do you mind leading us tonight in our pledge? Yeah. Thank you, Casey. We'll move on to communications from the public. We do have 6 public hearings scheduled under item 6 of our agenda. So if you're here to speak to those individual public hearings, please wait until I call those individual hearings. But if there's anything you'd like to share with the council, now would be your opportunity. And just your name and address when you approach the podium, please. Any public comment tonight? Toby.
For the record, Toby Scott, 1478 Barclay Lane, Whitefish. And I just wanted to bring up a couple issues which I've been bringing up for the past month and a half. And that is the lack of affordable rental housing for our workforce people. Anyone from janitors, dishwashers, bartenders, and people that work at the supermarket. I have a little consortium of people. It includes places like Don Kay. They need workers. The supermarkets need workers. And the only way we're going to get this is if the city council is able to increase the density and multifamily units through zoning and try and keep in mind to rezone regardless of the master plan. If there's things in the master plan we go, oh gee, we need to change zoning here. The master plan isn't written in stone. It's been modified on many occasions, and I would hope that you would do that. And that's basically it. Just I'm trying to keep on you so that we can look forward to hopefully being able to implement some available workforce housing for all those people so that we can eat at any restaurant we want to for lunch or dinner any day of the week. Thank you again.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks for coming tonight. Further comments from the public?
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Realize that I hate doing this, but I'm really passionate about accessory dwelling units, so I'm going to keep coming up and talking to you guys, being a bug in your ear. Kind of piggybacking off of what Toby said a little bit. I want to share a little bit about kind of my personal story, why I care about ADUs and value them as a form of housing as a full-time resident and a homeowner in Whitefish. About 4 or 5 years ago, my partner and I, who she happens to be a 5th generation local, realized that we had to leave Whitefish for a few years to be able to essentially make enough money to be able to buy a house and come back. That was sad for me because I like it here, but for her that was pretty devastating. It was very hard for her to do, and I think it's because she realized that we may very well never be able to come back. We were able to do it just by the skin of our teeth, thankfully. Was able to find a house that I could afford to buy in town. And looking at the market now, had I waited a couple months, I don't think that I would have been able to do it and we wouldn't be here. And that would be sad for us. So I think that window of opportunity that I took advantage of is kind of closing for other people in our similar situation, maybe in our generation as well. We currently have 2 roommates because we have a house that's way too big for us. We don't need all the space, quite frankly. And we also care about the community and housing people. That may not always work for us, but I do always want to have roommates in the house, but I do always want to be able to house people in the community. But I'm not rich. The only thing I might be able to do is build an accessory dwelling unit on the lot that I already own that's basically free, and I just have to put the structure up. I do view the long-term ADU rental income that I'll make over the next 40, 50 years, 60 years if I'm lucky, as key to me being able to afford, and for us being able to afford to continue living in this town as the prices continue to go up, property values go up. Generally, it's probably going to become more expensive to live here. I also see it as key to being able to maintain our home into the future and make any necessary renovations that we have to as we age, so that the home can still be accessible for us. I'm a physical therapist. I'm not going to be rich, probably. There's always a chance, I guess, but I'm probably not going to make a whole lot more money than I make right now, ever. And so I do see that as important. I think there are a lot of other people in that similar situation, and maybe a lot of other people that are pretty close to retirement that are in that situation as well. I want to give a couple very real examples of why owner occupancy requirements, even for somebody like me who lives here full time, may be a bad idea to have. I've been laid off in my life. I had to go work out of town on a travel contract. Typically those are 3 months. So I go out on one of those. I'm already going to run afoul of the owner occupancy requirements. If I want to remain in compliance with the current law, I'm going to have to kick my tenant out and unhouse somebody to be able to do that if that were to happen. We all have family. Family can get sick. You may need to leave town permanently for 3 months, 6 months, a year to go care for a family member. That would also put you in violation of the owner occupancy requirements in the code. And so it doesn't just affect people that don't live here full time. It affects people that live here full time when their life circumstances might change in the future. And then I also had a couple people reach out to me this week who have owned rental properties, rent them out to long-term tenants affordably in a lot of cases because they've owned the properties for a long time, and they would love to put an ADU in the backyard to be able to house more people, maybe make it a little bit more financially viable for them to keep that property rather than selling it down the line as the property values continue to go up. However, they can't right now. And so kind of the focus today is the owner occupancy requirements. I hope these are some good examples that you can kind of think about when you're thinking about whether to keep that in the code or not. Obviously, I think it should go. Don't know if you read, I sent you in the email, but I did write a guest column in the Flathead Beacon kind of about this topic as well. Some other things that I think need change, but I just want to focus on one thing at a time. So thanks for hearing me.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate your comments. Further public comment tonight? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our communications from volunteer boards. Are there any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about council? Not seeing any, we'll move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda. You have the August 16th special as well as regular session minutes. Any corrections or additions, or can I have a motion for approval?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Michelle, which brings us quickly to our first public hearing, item 6A, which is consideration of a request from Bean Smiley for conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment over a new garage located at 304 Columbia Avenue. The property is zone WR2, which is our 2-family residential. Wendy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So the applicant is requesting a CUP to do an accessory apartment behind an existing single-family residence. It'll be built above a new garage towards the west of the property. There's an existing garage that will be removed as part of this request. Again, the address is 304 Columbia Avenue. It's developed with a single-family home. It's surrounded by residential uses, zone WR2, with an urban land use designation. The property is served by all public services and facilities. A notice was mailed to adjacent landowners. A sign was posted on the property. A notice was mailed to advisory agencies, and we also posted legal in the pilot, and we did not receive any comments. So similar to all the other accessory apartments you see before you, just a couple of the highlights. This property is actually 2 lots, and so before a building permit is issued, they'll have to do a lot line or a lot consolidation and eliminate that middle lot line. Setbacks can be met. It was noted in the staff report that they need 20 feet for their parking off of East 3rd, and a revised site plan did get put in your packet, reducing the width of that structure so they can meet this parking dimensional requirements. So that standard's being met. Height, lot coverage, and all the other accessory apartment standards are being met. The site is suitable for it. They can meet all the parking requirements. And there are a number of these in that neighborhood, so it's not out of character with the neighborhood. The planning board held a public hearing on August 19th. The applicant's representatives spoke in favor of the project, and the planning board unanimously recommended approval, subject to 8 conditions of approval. Those include that the parking spaces must be a minimum of 20 feet in length, which the revised site plan shows that they are now. They need to eliminate the middle lot line before a building permit is issued, and then the standard deed restriction, that the property owner needs to live in the property in order to rent it out, and it can't be used for short-term rental. Can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Not seeing any questions, Wendy, thanks. We did advertise for a public hearing on this item, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public comment or testimony? We'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Is the applicant's representative here by chance? If you'd like to talk, sir, I didn't mean to not acknowledge you earlier before I closed the public hearing.
It's Phil Duty, 2898 Highway 93 North, Kalispell. And I did the drawings and designed the building for Bean. And I just tried to keep with all of this stuff that they want, that you guys want. And I think we did that. And I think it'll be a good thing for the town. We need more housing.
Great.
So, but I'll answer any questions anybody might have here.
Thank you. You have a question, Rebecca?
Just, I like the design. I just wonder about, are the windows discreet enough to allow privacy for the neighbors?
Well, it is a corner lot, and it faces one neighbor to the south. But the windows are just normal windows. I don't know what you could do to make them different. I mean, the lower level is garage, so you know, the upper level would be where she would be living, and at least temporarily.
Thanks. It's just kind of a pet peeve of mine to keep privacy for the neighbors. So thank you.
Okay.
Further questions for the applicant? Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming up tonight. And on that note, I will close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion.
I move that we approve WCUP 21-15, the findings of fact in the staff report and the 8 conditions of approval.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. We'll move on to item 6B, which is ordinance 21-14, and ordinance amending ordinance numbers 1801 and 1902, which approved and subsequently amended the 95 Caro LLC preliminary plat and planned unit development to develop a 22-lot mixed-use development at the north end of Caro Avenue on the former Idaho Timber property located at 95 Caro Avenue in Whitefish.
Good
Dave.
evening again. So yeah, in 2018, the original 95 Caro preliminary plat and PUD was approved. That included residential units, professional offices, lodging, restaurant, some limited retail, light manufacturing, some artisan workshop space, some studios and galleries, personal services, and other similar uses. And again, they included some live-work lots and upper 4 condominiums, and it was a 22-lot subdivision on 14 acres. In 2019, that was amended to add clubs, private, and semi-private recreational facilities to the list of conditionally permitted uses. Just a reminder that the original PUD had 29 conditions of approval, and all those will still apply. And it allowed deviations to building setbacks, parking, and approved building footprints and uses that would have otherwise required a CUP. So a lot of times when there's a PUD, there's CUP uses, they're just incorporated into that PUD approval. Since that time, the applicant has been working towards final plat and meeting the conditions and has done significant site work, including getting permitting for the trails along the Whitefish River. So with this particular amendment, they're proposing the following changes. They're converting building number 1 from what was originally a microbrewery to a 3-story, 9-unit residential structure, and shifting the microbrewery use to a location connected to the restaurant, which was building 3A. Adding a 3rd level to building number 2 to add additional residential units, adding a 3rd above grade level to buildings 4 and 5 to add 8 more residential units. They're eliminating the ancillary use space by defining other uses, restaurant and spa, and the 70-room hotel. I'm getting rid of building 7 completely and reconfiguring the plaza adjacent to the marketplace building. And then 7 additional units, a mix of studio and 1-bedroom units above each of the approved garages that were part of the original approval. And then adding a third level to buildings 8 and 9 for 10 additional residential units. And then building 10, they were replacing the mezzanine level commercial space with 30 residential units on 2 upper levels. And then the northwest portion of the main level would be used for indoor residential parking. So the entire existing structure, which is building 10, would be removed and recycled. And then the new building we put on that footprint and also expanded 32 feet to the northeast and 32 feet to the southwest. And then, so the marketplace would then occupy 15,568 square feet on the ground floor with an atrium, and then again, that indoor parking of 48 spaces. So those amendments would eliminate 3 of the live-work units. They retains 10 residential units, and it introduces 74 new proposed residential units, reduces the professional office space by 3,200 square feet, and then it reduces the marketplace, commercial and artisan manufacturing uses by 25,000 square feet. And then an additional reduction of about 6,400 square feet of the ancillary use space in the condo hotel. So with the Wellness Institute idea not really panning out, they're adjusting their project to adapt to local market changes and the established need for more residential units locally. So there'll be 1 less building and a total of 84 residential units on the site. The commercial uses be reduced by about 50%. All the parking standards are met, and the traffic generation should not increase. Just a note that we did finally receive the updated transportation study that does show, again, at full build-out, a need for a light at Caro and Highway 93 North. There won't be any reduction in open space. All the amenities that were going to be provided with the original project are still the same. There's no additional zoning deviations being requested. And all the access and the parking and the general building layouts are unchanged. So as a reminder, it's zoned WIT, which is our industrial transitional district, as well as WT3, our neighborhood mixed-use transitional, which is a multifamily zoning district. It's surrounded by county industrial zoning on 3 sides, and then existing WR3 residential to the south. We did notice the neighbors within that area. There wasn't any comments prior to the staff report going out to the planning board, but we did receive 3 comments since then. 2 of the comments were directly related to the existing First Avenue right-of-way that is not developed, and how access will be maintained on that. And then we did receive an additional letter today that had some concerns about the traffic light and whether it will be installed at that intersection, and additional noise and traffic from the development from John and Sandy Cuffle. And so I think that further development could be an improvement from an industrial site, but they do want to see noise reduced and a traffic signal there. So in order to approve the plan unit development, there are certain criteria in the code related to that. Since the changes to this don't necessarily encompass the entire PUD, many of the things are still met. As far as environmentally sensitive areas on the site, there's not going to be any change to the restoration plans along the river or to the wildlife habitat. Usable open space will actually be increased since 1 building is being removed. Preserving the character of the existing neighborhood. They don't necessarily change that, although removing commercial space should reduce some of the daily vehicle trips, while it is adding significantly more residential uses, which is more in character to the residential neighborhood around that. There's no changes to the infill or the buffers or the street connectivity. Bicycle and pedestrian accesses are not changing. As far as affordable housing goes, there was never any affordable housing proposed to this project. But they are adding, 74 new units of additional multifamily condo housing, although none of that will be deed restricted for affordability. As far as residential product types, again, that's something that will be reviewed by the Architecture Review Committee when it comes to the design of the buildings with the residential uses above, as part of that mixed-use component. As far as compliance with or implementation of the growth policy, this particular property has had quite a bit of outlines in our Highway 93 West Corridor Plan as far as what should happen there. And that plan did identify those areas of that property as industrial transitional and neighborhood mixed-use transitional. The industrial transitional looks at industrial areas that would be transitioning from an industrial use to adaptive clean industries and things like business incubators. Some of the characteristics are high quality access to multimodal transportation and utilities, and are supposed to be a catalyst for job generation and economic development with easy access to downtown. And as far as the neighborhood mixed-use transitional, it's transitioning from historic uses of high-density residential to more contemporary uses, including some mixed-use opportunities. So with regard to the growth policy, it does talk about economic development goal 2C, look at ways to diversify the local base economy with compatible businesses and industries, and while protecting the character of Whitefish, promote beneficial job growth with the base economy, and then, with the changes reducing the amount of commercial square footage and opportunity for light industrial, it does impact that opportunity to provide additional high-paying job growth. However, the original approval did contemplate residential units, and so adding more residential is consistent with the original plan. As far as infill goes, with the Highway 93 West Corridor Plan, as I know Andy was on that committee, there was a lot of scrutiny on this property of what could be developed and should be developed. I know there was a lot of concern about maintaining the site because it has a rail spur as an industrial property of some sort, while maybe not being heavy industrial, but offering opportunities for some commercial and high-paying jobs in the light industrial sector. Transitioning away from that, but also activating the Whitefish River and providing public access to that as a recreational amenity. So I do believe this project still maintains that, while it does, there's some concerns about reducing that opportunity for economic development on that property. So the first finding, with the imposition of the original conditions, the first 10 criteria are found in the intent of the PUD chapter, and they are providing adequate community benefit. With regard to the growth policy, in finding 2, reducing the marketplace area, an opportunity for light manufacturing does impact the envisioned potential for a formerly industrial site for economic development. Moves further away from the intent of the WIT industrial transitional zoning. However, adding additional residential uses is still consistent with the mixed-use vision of the site as outlined in the 93 West Corridor Plan. As far as the amendments to the code, a PUD is a zoning text amendment. It does meet all the criteria in that for approval. And then the property is suitable for the proposed modifications to the plan. The proposal does comply with a lot development standards, including the previously approved zoning deviations, access, and the plan to address the environmental constraints of the property. All those things remain unchanged. Staff did recommend approval of the request to the Whitefish Planning Board with all the 29 original conditions of approval, and noting that when this is reapproved, they will extend their deadline for the 3 years from the approval. So on August 19th, the Planning Board did meet and reviewed this. There was a public hearing. The Planning Board did recommend unanimously to send it to the City Council for approval. Only the applicant spoke at that meeting. There was no public comment there. So that is a summary of my staff report. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have, and I know that the applicant and his representative are here to answer additional questions.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Ben?
Just one question. Dave, could you address the concerns expressed over the First Street right away?
Yeah, so on the desk in front of you guys, I did provide an updated letter and email from Bruce Booty, and what they're proposing. So the concern was that there was a condition on the original plat that said that any public trail that's put in that First Street right-of-way needs to also protect future access for those properties, because those lots on Highway 93 are pretty deep lots, and there's a potential for them to be subdivided, and that First Avenue right-of-way utilized as access to those lots. And so at least one of the adjacent property owners was concerned about maintaining, a level area to be able to get down to the river, because it was fairly tore up at the time when the notices went out. Since then, I believe the applicant has gone down and regraded some of that trail down there to make it a little bit easier, but because of the site work they were doing, and the public access was a little bit tricky with the First Avenue right-of-way being tore up. And then the other property owners, there's 3 lots on there that are along that, I think it's 4, 5, and 6, that would have access, off of that First Street right-of-way if they were to develop something on that property. And that property owner was concerned that they'd be able to use First Street to be able to get to the back of their property. And so, I think the applicant was a little bit maybe unaware of that condition that stated that they had to, when they built that trail, to be able to maintain that right-of-way access. And so we talked about that at length at the planning board meeting, and then Bruce Booty recently, just today, or actually it was Friday, sent us an email with an additional 20 feet of potential easement on those lots, 6, 7, or 5, 6, and 7, that would allow them more room for the roadway to be on there, and then also a few feet on the 95 Carroll property to allow some greater expansion of that. Part of the issue is the steepness of the slope, getting that trail down there and trying to maintain that as ADA accessible, while also providing room for that right-of-way to be utilized by people that want to bring their cars down there. And we were trying to just, as staff, concerned about any conflict between people on bicycles and cars coming in and out of there, to make sure there was room enough for an actual bike path to not be, sharing the roadway. So I think they've come up with a good solution on that. And you can, again, that email from Bruce on your desk kind of outlines that.
Anything further from council? We did advertise for public hearing on item 6B. I know Bruce and Casey are here. Do you have anything additional to add in addition to Dave's staff report? And you don't have to. Name and address for the record, please.
Casey Malmquist, 160 Walker Creek Lane, Whitefish. Thank you, council and staff. I actually wanted to wind this back a little bit because this project is actually something I'm very proud of and frankly quite passionate about. This community has been great to me. I look at myself as first being a member of the community, second as a builder, and somewhere on that path as a developer. And our intentions when we started this was just looking at what an incredible opportunity this piece of property was. And under typical development schemes, developers will come in and kind of create a business plan and maximize that and kind of wiggle and force their way into acceptance of the project, tweaking this, pushing that. We took a very different approach with this team, is looked at what the city wanted for this piece of property, taking into consideration the 93 West Corridor Plan, the zoning overlays, and came up with something that worked for the community, basically gave them what they asked for in terms of what all of that work that went into over many years with public hearings and planning. And then we tried to figure out a plan that would work from a development standpoint. And I think we've come to a place where all of this works and is going to create something positive. There were some fundamental things that happened in the course of this. It's taken more time certainly than we anticipated, but I think in that some good things have happened. One of them is, COVID happened. And in that, we've all had a time to kind of sit back and take stock and think about some things. In that, gotten a lot of feedback in terms of what would work there, what people are interested in, and some of that has changed. The other thing that happened was I've really tried to work at repurposing and recycling and reusing everything we can there. We've taken all the concrete, ground it up. We've had very little infill, outfill movement there. We're trying to reuse everything that's there. We've taken out a tremendous amount of steel and waste and trash and recycled it. Wanted to repurpose the existing building there, and that presented a lot of challenges. And finally found out, digging into it deeper, there are some literally foundational issues with the building, and it just became sort of unfeasible. But in that, Bruce and I got together, and by eliminating the building, creating more parking, we were able to, I think, enhance this project. We're not changing the use of this at all. Everything that was originally proposed is there. Some of it is shifted in numbers, but very, very little. What we were able to do by providing parking, which as you know is a real driver for development, ground level parking where that building was, podium style construction going above it, was keep everything else in place and add residential. And as we all know, that's a huge issue here in this community. So we're adding 74 more residential units to a project and really changing very little on the rest of it, if anything. So I think, frankly, the project has gotten better, will serve the community better, and we're looking forward to having that happen.
Great. Thanks, Casey. Quick question from Rebecca, Casey, if you don't mind.
Casey, so originally there was going to be a pool, but that's not going to happen now because of the wellness thing is done?
Yeah, that whole thing just didn't work out.
Okay.
We had an interested party that was kind of pursuing that, and that
All right.
didn't work.
I was really excited about that, but that's okay.
So was that.
And then Wendy had told me that you might be building a bridge, a walking bridge over the river, and it's on this plan. Is that still part of this?
Absolutely.
Great. And then the last thing is anything happening over at the Peace Park? Or is that just going to stay the same? You guys interfacing at all?
I mean,
Ryan?
Obviously, we're working with them to the extent on the shared parking agreement, but what they're doing at the Peace Park per se, I can't speak to. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Casey. Any public testimony tonight on this item? Rhonda?
Actually, I have a quick question for Bruce. Just
Okay, let's take
if I could
Rhonda's
clarify.
comment first, and
Okay.
then Bruce, we have a question for you.
Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Ave. I attended the 93 West Corridor meetings, and I did always think that this would be a great place for housing because it's close to downtown. And so the multifamily housing is very appealing to me, 75 or 74 more units. It's a great idea. I just hope it's for people who live and work in Whitefish, and that I didn't quite hear that. And so that is something that would make it even more appealing, is if it's meant to actually address our housing problem and not be speculative real estate play. So that's the concern. If it's 74 units that people who live and work here can buy, that's wonderful. And I hope that's what you have in mind. I'm encouraging you. And the other thing I thought at the time of the 93 West is that those lots on 93 are very, very deep. And if First Street was actually built out, all those other owners could access the back half of their property and build more multifamily residential. And it would be close to downtown, and you could ride your bike and ride into town or walk, whatever. And so I think that it would be great if First Street could become a street. And I'm not sure how that works, but don't developers build the streets when they develop property? Just a thought, because that really should be a street there, especially with the density that we're talking about now. So, thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Steve, question for Bruce?
Yeah, Bruce, looking at this map that you just gave us, it's hard to tell. I just want to make sure the bike path actually goes all the way around and connects to the existing path that goes under the train trestle, because it's hard to tell if it does.
So the bike path is remaining intact. So if you can envision First Street, it's a very narrow right-of-way. It's 30 feet wide. And it goes for the first part going east of Caro Avenue. It's on pretty level ground. And then it starts to drop toward the river. And it drops so steeply that we had to take the proposed bike trail and wind it in switchbacks to get down to the river level and our docks. So in essence, we were already providing 20 feet of additional space in addition to the existing right-of-way on the north side of it, on the 95 Carroll property. And then we were in the right-of-way going through the more level area, and then we switched back way outside of the right-of-way, probably eating up an acre or more of ground of 95 Carroll to make grade on that trail. So in our drawing that we're showing now, we've just defined that better. We're showing the right-of-way in exactly the same place. The trail is almost exactly in the same place. We did shift part of it further on to 95 Carroll. And then we are providing, 95 Carroll is providing an additional 20 feet of easement, even though I'm using that terminology. But remember, everything on 95 Carroll, the trail, the parking, the roads, the bridge, everything is owned and maintained by 95 Carroll, but it's all conditioned, it's open to the public. So there's no restriction on that. But I'm just saying we are providing that additional 20 feet, and we were asking the owners of lots 5, 6, and 7 to provide 20 feet on their side, because it's a 30-foot right-of-way. You can't put a 20-foot trail or a 10-foot trail and a 20-foot roadway, and you're just going to have those uses mixing together. We're trying to find a way to provide some separation and still provide the two uses. A reasonable road access, not a 60-foot wide right-of-way, and the public trail that was conditioned in the original project, 95 Carroll.
I just want to make sure it connects, because it's hard to tell on this map that the one that we just got. As it switches back and goes down, and then it looks like it ends, but is that where the docks are? And then you kind of go across the docks to the other
Yes.
connecting piece, is that?
Is there any way to display a PDF of it?
It's okay, you can just say yes or no.
Okay.
It
Yes,
does
it does.
connect? Okay, that's all
It
I need
does
to know.
connect.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. That's all I really wanted to know, Bruce, thanks.
Okay.
The trail takes off from that dock connection, it then goes north through the entire riverfront property.
Including going under the trestle, going north of the 95 Carroll property line, under the trestle, and connecting into the trail to Sky Park Bridge.
Thanks, Bruce.
You bet.
Thanks for the clarification. Any public testimony on this item tonight?
John, we do
Sure.
have somebody who would like to speak
Thank you.
via WebEx.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Go ahead and unmute your mic.
Hello, yes, this is Dan Rasmussen. I own the lots 5 and 6, the Hendricks. Bought lot 5 back in 1994. Lived in Whitefish there through 2008 and the great economic change. However, I did see the documents that Booty reported to us about the easements. I think that's an outstanding compromise. I'm definitely for it, and is also a partner of the Accord Ventures that owns lot number 7. Where I can say that we are definitely for you doing that and maintaining the pathway as well as having the access, so that way we can keep the 93 corridor as whole and as undisturbed as possible.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the comments. Further public testimony? Not seeing any, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion preferably. Rebecca?
Could I just ask Craig a question?
Of course.
Craig, I'm just wondering about Rhonda's idea about turning that into a street. When would we do that?
I think it
On
would
First Street?
presumably happen with the development of those Hendricks tracks. Right now, 95 Carroll is showing significant improvements on Carroll Avenue to make the necessary connection to their property, so that future roadway improvement would happen with the development of those 93 properties.
Okay, so we don't have to do anything tonight then?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben, please.
I would move to approve WPUD 21-13, the findings of fact in the staff report and as recommended by the planning board.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
Clarification, I think you mean WPUD 21-02, do you not, Ben? It is going to be resolution 21-13.
14.
14, but am I correct in assuming?
Yes, you are
that's
correct.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And that was a second, Rebecca, to the motion? Further discussion?
No,
Ben?
I would like to say, it feels like the changes are responsive to the needs of the community, so thanks for coming back.
All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Bruce. Take care. Good luck. I'd like to walk it someday if there's an opportunity. Okay, great. Thanks. We'll move on to item 6C of the agenda. I had a quick question perhaps for you, Angie. Can we consolidate items C and D since they're basically adjoining properties with very similar requests and just hold one public hearing and one staff report, or do we want to do these individually?
I think you can consolidate them, but I'd want two separate motions.
Two separate motions, one public hearing? Okay, great. Dave?
Good evening. Filling in for Tara since she is in Poland right now at a Polish wedding. Probably having way more fun than we are. So this applicant's requesting a major variance to remove a deteriorating non-conforming seawall, the big yellow wall you're probably all familiar with, and replace it with a combination of beach gravel and a riprap slope planted with native vegetation. The beach gravel will initially cover an area approximately 16 feet lakeward of high water and be employed as a dynamic gravel beach to help maintain the annual high water mark at its current location and buffer the newly naturalized slope. And if you guys probably remember meeting with Dr. Mark Lorang of the University of Montana, and he was also part of the Flathead Lake ecological group down there. But anyway, he's one of the leading experts in the country on dynamic beaches and using them for erosion control rather than hardscapes such as seawalls and riprap and things like that. And so he did work with the designer of this project and the applicant to come up with a solution that I think is going to be a lot better and fit in a lot better with the actual shoreline of Whitefish Lake. Because it's some activities are there that alters the shoreline, and it's below the high water mark, it requires a major variance for that part of the work, as well as a floodplain permit, which they've already received that portion of it from City of Whitefish and State of Montana DNRC and FEMA. So they're requesting a standard permit for multiple activities in there, replacing the seawall with, again, a planted riprap slope planted with native vegetation, and then removing that painted wooden deck and stairs, and then they're installing a 4-foot wide dry set stone walkway for safe access to the existing dock. So this did go, the staff recommended approval of it with 18 conditions. It went to the Lakeshore Protection Committee on July 14th. There wasn't any additional public comment. The committee voted 6-1 to approve the project, or at least recommend approval to the council. This had to go to the planning board. It went there on August 19th because it's a major variance. There wasn't any additional public comment. The planning board did recommend it, also unanimously to recommend approval to the council on this. And I think it's probably best to let the applicant kind of go through the ins and outs of this. He's a little more technically savvy on this, and also I'm filling in, so I don't know all the details. But again, standard conditions of approval for this variance. Has to occur during low water, any of the removal of the structures, can't store things in the lakeshore zone, preserve the natural armament of the lake. New plants in there should have native plants, which they're planning on doing. So in general, a floodplain permit, like I mentioned, was required for the dredging. Since it was removing the wall below low water, it was considered a dredging permit. Then our standard riprap conditions are in place. So yeah, I'll let Kurt give you the overview.
Dave, did your staff report just now cover both?
No, I just covered the Marco one. The adjacent one is very similar.
Why don't we cover that real quickly
Okay.
before we take the applicant's comments?
So yeah, with the Ellis project next door, again, they're, continues that seawall, so they're removing that seawall. They're gonna do plant a riprap slope. Again, about 16 feet, lakeward of the high water mark. They're gonna add beach gravel. And then, riprap at a 1 to 2 slope. And so, again, they're removing a concrete hot tub pad on this one. They're installing a 4-foot wide dry set stone walkway and steps. They are removing 4 trees in order to complete the work and replace them with 4 paper birches. They are within the constructed area that's allowed on that project. And, you know, considerations for a major variance, there's, it would result in a hardship to the structural deterioration of that particular wall, and the chipping paint is currently contributing to lake pollution. And since it originally altered the natural shoreline, the wave energy off that is impacting adjacent properties and causing erosion. So by renaturalizing the site, it's going to get rid of that existing problem there. There aren't very many alternatives to that. I mean, they could try to prop up the wall or replace that seawall, but renaturalizing it and creating a gravel beach is going to be a better option. It's going to definitely only have positive impacts on the lakeshore, bring the slope back closer to natural grade, alleviate issues associated with the wave energy and erosion of adjacent properties, and does provide a universal benefit. And again, we did notify the adjacent property owners and didn't receive any comment on that. And from our perspective, it does meet the criteria for a major variance. And again, the Lakeshore Committee had the same general comments and did recommend approval 6-1, and then the Planning Board reviewed it, and again, they recommended unanimous approval.
Great, thanks, Dave. Sir, just name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, council members. Kurt Bonfeld, 234 2nd Street West, Kalispell. I'm the landscape architect.
Microphone, please. Yeah, sir, just for the record.
Is that better? I'm the landscape architect and agent for both Mr. Ellis and Mr. Marco. If you have any questions or if you'd like me to kind of go through anything, I can.
Any questions? Rebecca?
Yeah, could you just, oops, I'm sorry, could you just explain how you're gonna put the riprap and then I just haven't seen this design. I mean, I trust you, but I just wanna know for reference.
It is a somewhat of a new, I guess, solution. The property next door has a similar riprap slope. We're trying to mimic that, and in order to do that, the current wall that's there on the edge of the lakeshore has established an artificial high water line, both vertically and horizontally. And in order to remove that, we have to keep the high water line exactly where it is now. And so to achieve that, we're going to do a 2-to-1 riprap slope and bring that down to the beach. And then in front of that riprap slope, we're going to employ beach gravels as a way to soften the waves before they crash against the newly created slope. So the riprap will be installed and compacted, and we'll have filter fabric below it, and the gravel will meet that slope at the toe. So by planting that riprap slope, then the roots of the native grasses will help further stabilize that new slope. So.
Thanks, Rebecca. And your name again, sir?
Kurt Vomfeld.
Kurt?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't catch
No
it
problem.
the first time.
No problem.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Further public testimony on this item, or any for that matter? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for individual motions on items. Sure, Andy?
Frank was going to ask this, but I'll go ahead and ask it ahead of him anyway. So. Go for it. I'm assuming Dave and Tara's not here, but on the first page of the staff report, it says staff recommends approval of the minor variance request. I'm assuming that's
Should
a
say
typo on
major.
both?
Yeah, it's a major on both.
Okay. And then, well, I'll go ahead and make a motion then, now that we've clarified that. And I would make a motion to approve the first one, and that is our WLV 21-W 41, and that's a request from Casa Marco Montana LLC for a Whitefish Lake and Lake Shore variance.
And I'll second.
Comments?
Quick comment on that. As part of this, I would like to come from the Lakeshore Committee, well, a couple of things actually. First, from the Lakeshore Committee, we need to reach out to the people that installed the one just east of this property. And one of the conditions of approval for that was that we get a report back on how that is actually functioning. We have not done that. I've asked a couple times now, I think, so we should do that. I'm tempted to add that same condition here, but I think if we get the one, we would be okay. And my other comment is that I'd like to see that, and I said this last time also, because watching what is happening on the lake today and the amount of wave action we have, and Garth Wells is gonna hate me again, from wake boats, the wave action on the lake is phenomenally increased. I mean, it's just unbelievable, and we're gonna see more and more lakeshore issues with erosion, and I think because of our current requirements in the lakeshore protection of not allowing very much gravel being applied anywhere, we're gonna have to start seeing more and more of it in this kind of solution. If what we learned from the folks at Yellow Bay is a good solution, it's something we're gonna have to take a look at and adopt and look at, you know, putting into our lakeshore protection regulations.
To that point, have the regulations been updated since we did meet with Mark?
Nope, we've been, yeah, I mean, I was waiting, we sent a draft to Mark, and he was supposed to give us back some comments on that, and he
Yeah, I
just
know
got too busy, and,
He's super busy.
and, you know, we were busy as well, so it's been difficult. You know, Kurt might be able to give you some insight, Andy, on how that other project's been functioning, because I believe he's designed that project, and so he might be able to give you some feedback.
Would you like that?
Yeah.
Kurt, do you mind coming back up? Yeah. Please, thanks.
I mean, I just think going forward, it's gonna be important for the lake. It's gonna be an issue we're gonna face time and time again, and just shoreline erosion is gonna be a huge problem, and it's just gets worse all the time, so. And I don't think wake boats are going away, even if we charge a resort tax for them.
Please, yep, thanks. You are following up with a report? Okay, appreciate that. Further comments on item 6C? We have a motion for approval. It's been seconded by Councilor Sweeney. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. And we'll need a similar motion for item 6D.
I'll go ahead and do it again then, I guess, and I would then move to approve WLV 21-W42, which is a very similar request from CCRFLP Holdings for a Whitefish Lake and Lake Shore major variance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Comments from the council? Michelle, any public comment before we vote? No.
Only one last comment. Both these walls are really ugly, and I'm so glad they're going away. Yeah, it will be a huge improvement there now if we can just get Glenwood Homeowners Association to get rid of theirs. We'll be all set. So.
All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand, and those opposed, and that motion carries unanimously as well. Thanks for coming up tonight. You bet. We'll move on to item 6E, ordinance 21-15, and ordinance amending Title 12 of our subdivision regulations of the Whitefish City Code, and this will be on a first reading. Wendy.
All right. So we are proposing to update the subdivision regulations due to some recent legislative changes this last session and some previous ones that we're kind of playing catch up on. We're also updating the subdivision regulations in order to be more in line with the engineering standards that were approved about a year and a half ago. There were some changes there that we needed to fix in our subdivision regulations, and then just a number of housekeeping items that we've been keeping track of. The last major rewrite was in 2009. That's when we reorganized all the regulations. We've had a few little amendments kind of since then. The most recent one, of course, was updating the legacy home section to make it voluntary, and that was just maybe about a month ago. So we did notice adjacent or advisory agencies, no adjacent landowners, but we did send it out to surveyors, engineers, landscape architects, and other design professionals that have done subdivisions in the last like 2 or 3 years, and we didn't receive any comments from folks. So the document does maintain its 2009 kind of organization, especially with the design standards. We really want people to consider the land and then consider how you're accessing it and kind of then the amenities after that. So that has not changed. But a few of the more major changes, in this last legislative session, a group of folks got together, surveyors, realtors, planners, I think the Building Association, and came forward with this expedited preliminary platting process. And so this has to be will go into effect in October, which is why we're bringing it to you now. This expedited preliminary plat is going to be eligible for projects that are in city limits, they're zoned, they're not asking for any deviations or variances, they meet all of our standards, they can provide extension of public infrastructure. The expedited preliminary plat only has one public hearing, and that'll come before you folks. You folks would need to make a decision within 35 working days, very similar to the minor subdivision. And again, we're recommending that you hold that public hearing. You could delegate that authority to, say, the planning board, but the 35-day window makes it kind of tough, and then ultimately you have to make the decision anyway. So we're recommending that you hold the public hearing, make that final decision. In the law that was passed, the legal noticing was pretty limited, and so we're suggesting that we make it similar to the minor subdivision, which is we'll notice neighbors within 150 feet, we'll still place a legal in the paper like we always do, and then put a sign on the property. So neighbors will know a little bit more. So that's kind of a new exciting process. And, you know, we've had a few subdivisions recently where, you know, there was one on the corner of O'Brien and Sawtooth. It's like 4 lots, road, sewer, water, sidewalks, everything's in. And this will be a mechanism for those folks to just come right before you instead of having the 2 public hearings and the longer kind of process. If they meet all the standards, we've done enough of that kind of background analysis that kind of makes some sense for Whitefish at any rate. Another new provision that was added by the legislature is to conduct a public hearing for a phased subdivision prior to the commencement of a phase. State law is pretty vague, what's prior to commencement. So we've offered some definitions to mean after engineering plans are approved, so after you folks have approved it, after engineering plans are approved, before they start moving the dirt, they would have to come back before you with a public hearing, which is kind of goofy. But apparently this came out of a county south of here somewhere where they had this 30-year phase subdivision. Well, in 30 years, you know, there could be some pretty significant changes. And it also sounds like maybe some of the analysis that we typically require up front wasn't all happening. They're like, oh, well, we'll put the traffic analysis off to a later date, or, you know, some of those other analysis things that we would typically require, you know, right up front. This commencement of a phase, folks would have to come before you with a public hearing and show that nothing has changed, and then they can continue. If there's some like significant changes, I don't know, an eagle's nest shows up or something, you know, something significant that we didn't know about way back when, then you folks could analyze it and possibly add conditions pertaining to that particular issue. A couple of other things that we've added, because again, the law was pretty vague and it didn't really define things, is that we've decided that a first phase is not a phase. So a subdivision that's coming in for like a 10-phase subdivision, the first one, they can just go forward. It'd be the second one that you would have an opportunity to look at, because usually those are a few years out. And then also a project that installs all of the infrastructure at one time isn't a phased development. For example, the Trailview subdivision, Jerry Dunker's project over there south of Creekwood, he put in all the water and the sewer and the roads and everything's in. He's phasing just the development of the lots. So we're not calling that a phased subdivision. So it's kind of this interesting new law. So that's a new feature that's in our subdivision regulations. A couple of other items are just things that have come up that we've added. Under the tree preservation section, we've added that a certified arborist would review the site and help determine which trees can and should be incorporated into the design. We updated the urban wildland interface section to the most current and best available information. The boulevard and street tree section looks like it got just hacked to death, but really all those standards are in other places. A lot of the standards are in the engineering standards, like how close can a tree be to a stop sign and driveways and things like that. And then the other part is in the Parks Department, stuff about maintaining and managing public trees. So it just seemed better to have it in those sections. So that's why it looks like that. Finally, the exemption and invasion criteria section, we updated that with the current state law, and then we modeled our chapter kind of after Bozeman. We really liked how they had that outlined. So those are kind of the big changes. So the planning board did hold a public hearing on August 19th. No one spoke on that from the public. Planning board did recommend approval unanimously. And there's one other little change we were hoping we could make tonight. On page 360 of your packet, which is 96 of the ordinance, there's a definition for sublot. And typically when we talk about sublots, it's like a townhouse, like a residential type of a development. You know, it's got a party wall, there's a house on either side. Each side is considered a sublot. We never considered these to be for a commercial. So we are starting to see some folks that are interested in doing commercial subdivisions with smaller buildings, which is what we kind of want to see, especially out on the highway corridor instead of gigantic, massive buildings. So we wanted to add to that definition of sublot that this definition does not include commercial pads. So that would be the only change we'd be requesting. And in the packet, you'll see that there was an underline and cross-out version, which sometimes can be kind of complicated to read, but we also put in a clean one, so hopefully that one was a little easier for reading. Can answer any questions for you.
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy? Rebecca?
Yeah, it was, I'm glad this is the first reading, because I have to go through it again, but I was happy to see the part about the tree retention. So I didn't see any fines or any reason, like, how do we enforce that? I mean, once a tree's gone, it's gone and we don't get it back, as we know from previous things. So we're just hoping that the inspections by the arborist will be enough to make sure that people.
I think that would be part of the conditions of approval. The violations and penalties section, I did have Angie take a quick peek at that, and she did do some updates, so, which is section 12.210, violations and penalties.
Okay.
So if they're violating the subdivision regulations, they would fall under that.
And so we do have it covered that we could actually charge a fine?
Yeah, it's based on state law, kind of like we were talking about at the work session.
But it's still not very much probably, but at least it's a deterrent. Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Wendy? Not seeing any. Thanks, Wendy. We did advertise for public hearing on ordinance 21-15. Are there any public comments tonight? Not seeing any. I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Ryan?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance number 21-15, an ordinance amending Title 12 subdivision regulations of the Whitefish City Code, WSUB 21-01, on a first reading.
Is there a second?
I'll second with a clarification. Is that included, does your motion include the referenced edit that Wendy wants from us on the sublot definition?
Yes, it does.
Good. Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? Any comment from the public before we take a vote here, Michelle? Online? No? Okay, just wanted to check. All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and the motion carries unanimously. Brings us on to our last public hearing of the evening, Resolution 21-37, a resolution amending the Whitefish Legacy Homes Program administrative procedures. Wendy?
All right, so this is a follow-up to your folks' action on August 2nd, amending the Whitefish Legacy Homes Program to make it a voluntary program and to reduce it from 20% to 10% of the total project. So the administrative procedures needed to be updated as well to reflect those changes and make them consistent with one another. So just as, I guess, some of the highlights, instead of having, I'm sure you recall that we wanted on-site, housing was our priority. It's been kind of reorganized that, you know, we'll take anything, you know, as long as it's suitable. But that on-site, of course, is our preferred method. But again, all the options are open. So that's most of the changes in this regulation, or its administrative procedures. And then the other item that was updated was the housing prices using the 2021 area median income for Flathead County, and then the average home prices. So the income dictates how much you can afford for house or rental. And so that chart was updated, and income went down for 2021, and so the prices, you'll notice, went down for houses and for rentals. And then, not surprisingly, housing prices went up. So the gap is bigger. So the fee in lieu, so the average house in 2020 was $775,589, which is a $182,000 plus increase since 2016. That's enormous. So the fee in lieu increased from $82,000 to $118,547. And I should point out as well is that we're no longer going to do the 10% administrative fee, because that would even make it greater. So had we not had that 10% fee back in 2020, that fee would have been $75,000. So really went from $75,000 to $118,000. And we come up with the fee based on the 3-year average of houses, throwing out things over $5 million. So that's how the fee is generated. It's that gap, what an affordable house, needs, a regular person needs to buy an affordable home, so. And that is about it.
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy? Thank you. We did advertise for a public hearing on Resolution 21-37. Are there any public comments tonight? Not seeing any. I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Steve.
I make a motion to approve Resolution 21-37, a resolution amending the Whitefish Legacy Homes Program Administrative Procedures.
Is there a second? I'll second. Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Michelle, we'll move on to item 7A, communications from our Public Works Director. Item 7A, which is consideration to authorize City Manager Smith to execute a preliminary engineering services agreement with BNSF to finally establish the Birch Point Quiet Zone, if I may add that. Greg.
It's a good ad lib there. I'll try and make this one relatively brief. I think council is aware that we do currently have 3 at-grade railroad crossings here in the city of Whitefish, and so we are no stranger to train horns. Quiet zones have been established at the State Park Road and East 2nd Street crossing. That occurred back in January of 2009, and it leaves only the Birch Point Drive crossing without an established quiet zone. The establishment of a quiet zone at Birch Point Drive has been on the list of council goals for years, and money has been allocated in the fiscal year 22 budget to work with a consultant to try and establish that quiet zone. As we move forward with the evaluation, the next step will be what's called our diagnostic review. This is a pretty intense meeting that we have with representatives from Burlington Northern, from the Federal Railroad Administration, and the Montana Department of Transportation, all of whom work together to regulate at-grade crossings of the BNSF rail line. So prior to scheduling that diagnostic review, BN does require that the municipality requesting the quiet zone enter into a preliminary engineering agreement with them to cover any costs they may incur during the review of the quiet zone. The agreement requires the city to pay BNSF for all expenses they incur. Typically, these come up during project site visits, conceptual design review, development of cost estimates, and reviewing and providing comments on preliminary quiet zone layouts. So the cost established in the proposed agreement is $15,685. This has been included in the fiscal year 22 budget. Those of you that have read through the agreement, it's pretty clear that this agreement is written almost entirely in the favor of BNSF. However, I will tell you it is a standard document they've used across the state of Montana, and amending the document, like most things with BNSF, requires an act of God. It would put it in the legal queue with BN, which is in no way a guarantee that any of our proposed amendments make their way to the document. It could, not that this has been a fast process, but it could lead to significant delays. So, you know, based on the fact that this document has been used in other municipalities, most recently in Columbia Falls, I do recommend that council authorize the city manager to execute the preliminary engineering services agreement, and we move forward with the establishment of this quiet zone.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions, or can I have a motion? Andy?
Just a couple of quick questions, I guess. And you're right, it's pretty heavily weighted to the BNSF, obviously. But just on the agreement, the last one caught me a little off guard, and I assume that Sioux Falls and everybody does this. It says, agency is solely responsible for establishing and, if approved, maintaining compliance of any quiet zone authorized by the FRA at its sole expense. Any additional work equipment required to be installed by the crossing as a result of the establishment of a quiet zone shall not be a cost to the BNSF. Does that mean that we maintain it in perpetuity too then? We pay for the bulbs and the new arms if somebody breaks them off and all of that?
We do, yeah, and we do those with the existing two crossings at State Park Road and East 2nd Street, and we have to certify every 5 years that we have inspected and brought them back into compliance, so it's what you're doing. Just to make that ultimately clear, they also put it in bold-faced capital letters in the agreement, which I really appreciated.
Frank?
Craig, is it too much to hope this is a not-to-exceed cost of $15,685?
No, I think it's an estimated cost.
It's just an estimated
Yeah, I can't
cost.
find it,
So
but
it could go over the 15,000. That's why I wanted Craig to bring this to your attention, to let me sign this one. Generally, if it's in the budget and it was something that the city attorney felt comfortable with, and it's a project we had budgeted like this, we wouldn't bring it forward to you, but this contract was questionable and what it could lock the city into for future costs. So I felt that the council needs to approve this.
Then my rhetorical question remains, Craig, what research has we done into the accuracy of their cost estimates?
You know, this cost estimate is based on a proposal from their consultant, a company called Rail Pros. And so what we're looking at in this agreement is just the costs to go through the design process. This doesn't include the actual construction of the quiet zone, which we anticipate will be well into the six-figure number.
Right.
So I think that we could have a fairly high level of confidence that this number is based on industry standard and what they've spent on similar quiet zones throughout the state.
Thank you.
Motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to authorize the city manager to execute a preliminary engineering services agreement with BNSF to establish a Birch Point quiet zone. In the proposed agreement, it's established that they are estimated it will only be $15,685.
Thank you, Frank. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Further discussion? Andy, I think this was literally on our goals list back in 2006 when I got on council and you were mayor.
Yeah, it's been there forever, so it's at least it's sort of a step in some direction. I'm not sure forward necessarily, but.
All those in favor of the motion? And it passes unanimously. Thanks, Michelle. And thank you, Craig. Move on to item 8A, communications from Ben Dahlman, our finance director, consideration to contract for audit and consulting services and direct the city manager to execute the contract and agreement. Ben.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Malfield and City Council. We're talking about the exciting audit process, and back in June 7th of 2021, we presented an RFP or a proposed RFP for audit services to be competitively purchased by the city, and we issued our RFP on June 8th, the day after the city council meeting. We advertised the RFP on June 13th and June 19th as discussed in the packet. We also put it on the Montana Society of Certified Public Accountants website, and they presented it to all their members. Proposals were due on June 15th. The city received 2 by 4:30 on that day. Whitfley LLP was one of the proposers, as was Denning, Downing and Associates. In the city council meeting, there were 3 members appointed to be on the selection committee, and the committee members looked at the proposals with the criteria in the RFP as we presented back in June. The selection committee reviewed the proposals and scored them according to that criteria, and we found that both firms were well positioned to provide services, but ultimately price was one of the major factors in the overall proposals, and Denning, Downing Associates provided a proposal with the best price, and the selection committee unanimously decided to recommend awarding the contract to Denning, Downing and Associates for audit services for fiscal year 21, 22, and 23, with 2 one-year potential optional extensions at our discretion. The contract that is provided in your packet is a standard audit contract that is reviewed by the state, and so the state will receive this contract and review it for content and make sure that it meets the needs of local government. So it will be provided to them by the audit firm, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have as it relates to the audit services RFP.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben on his staff report? Or can I have a motion? Ryan?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to award the contract for audit and consulting services to Denning, Downing and Associates, and direct City Manager Smith to execute the contract.
Thank you, Ryan. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion?
I'll just make a couple of quick comments, I guess. As Ben said, both firms were highly qualified to do it. We've obviously been with Denning for a very long time. There's some downside to that, as we discussed, in that if you have the same auditor come in all the time, you don't have a fresh set of eyes looking at things. But I think if we look at the job they've done for us for a long time, I don't ever see anything in there that they seem to miss. They seem to be pretty thorough, and they've been doing it since I got on the council in the 90s, for goodness sakes. I mean, they've been there doing it for a long time. But, you know, one of my concerns and what I argued for is, well, 2 things. Whitfley does not have a local office, which that concerned me a little bit. They were a higher cost, and then they would also be new to doing our audit, which would require more staff time, and I just kind of thought that at this point, staff didn't need any extra burden of having to show a whole new group of auditors around the building, and so in the end, I kind of argued for that. So I think that summarizes it pretty well, doesn't it, Dana and Ben? So.
I think Dana and I understood what you meant by training new auditors, and that point was well taken.
Yeah. Like those 2 actually scored that Whitfley a little higher than I did. I was a little more critical probably of Whitfley for those reasons alone. So, but I think we made a good choice, and like I said, I don't think that all those audits are done based on a set of standards and practices, and I don't see that Denning has ever let us down in that. So,
thanks, Andy. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. I think the only actionable item she needs direction on is the donation to the community of Browning. She has 2 options there for you to consider. One would be to the parent community outreach program based on the Browning Public School System, or to the Blackfeet Nation. And Dana, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
You know, a lot of that's within my staff report, but we did receive a letter, and Councilor Quinnell might want to share more about Parent Community Outreach Program since he contacted their representative. But I think either way, no matter which alternative the council so chooses to move forward with, I think the Browning community will be thankful for the donation of our, and again, we're donating general fund dollars since we're receiving American Rescue Plan dollars. We're just gonna donate the funds from the general fund so that we have no restrictions, or also Browning has no restrictions on utilizing those funds. Now, that said, you could put in restrictions on what the use of that donation is for, and that is up to City Council.
Thoughts? Steve?
I'll just say, although I think we can't lose with either one of these. There's a guarantee that this money's gonna go straight to kids to buy something that, you know, we all take for granted just so they can have shoes to get to school, which is kind of sad. It's also sad that it's kind of a one-time thing, that they're just gonna get, you know, 20, 30 kids are gonna get a pair of shoes and that's about it. Or maybe it's more than that, but it goes directly to kids for now. So the other thing, we give it to the Blackfeet Nation, we can try to, you know, limit what they can use it for without any oversight as to what they use it for. And I don't think that's a terrible thing. I just think that giving it directly to kids is a little more tangible.
Everyone in agreement on that? Thanks, Steve.
For clarification, their request was above the $3,100 that we'll receive from American Rescue Plan funds for Browning. Would you like to, I assume that would be the full request of $3,600 to account for all students that they identified?
I think hers was just an estimate, really.
Okay.
So I think, how much do we have? How close are we to that?
3186.
3186.
We're a couple $100 short. I guess it'll be up to council. Want to give them 3,600 or 3,186?
Yes, 36.
Okay.
And if we need to backfill the coffers, I'm willing to donate.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
All right, I'll reach out tomorrow. She'll be excited.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Steve, for reaching out. And any comments on Dana's staff report, or manager's report? Frank?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, thank you. You mentioned it, we start with your talking about the COVID-19 task force and the meetings and what's going on. One of the things, and Heidi, I'm glad you're here for this, I happen to end up in the emergency room department at North Valley this weekend, and I'm talking to the staff there about what was going on. On a Saturday afternoon, they are overrun with COVID cases. They are exhausted. My understanding, I have contacts down in the KRMC emergency room as well. The reference to what kind of a show is going on down there, I cannot speak on family TV. All COVID-19, all unvaccinated people. I do not know why we cannot bring more public attention to this issue and make it now. The newspapers are not covering it, they're not paying attention to it, and maybe they want it to go away. But we are literally killing ourselves around here. And anything we can do with that task force that would highlight and elevate the conversation in the Valley, I would be happy to participate in, or anything we can do. But this is not something, unfortunately, everybody thinks it's going on behind closed doors and it doesn't affect them. The number of people that are out with COVID is just ridiculous. And so anything we can do, I would sure appreciate it. And if we need to reconvene them or try to get them back and to, come up with a game plan, we just got to do it. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just actually add on to that, Frank, because that's part of the discussion that I do want to have with you is talking about messaging. While the COVID task force met and wasn't, super strong in a recommendation for a new messaging outreach campaign, I think it was because the sentiment among everybody, it was just so deflated. The healthcare workers that were on that call, they're exhausted, and they don't know that messaging is going to fix the problem. But that said, I did talk to the WAVE board, actually, a couple of the board members, and they're going to offer, the WAVE is looking to offer a vaccine clinic. They would be happy to get on any messaging with the city on, really pushing the vaccination because, as Health Officer Russell said during our meeting, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated now, and it is severely straining our resources. Our fire department, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're transporting probably, a handful of COVID patients daily. Am I off? No, I'm right. Okay. I don't know if it's still holding true. At least last I heard that was. So That's a challenge for not only our emergency services, but when you have somebody who has a heart attack or some other illness, that impacts their ability to get medical care. And so but again, I don't want to put out any messaging that the council is not fully supportive of, because we act as one. So if there's some kind of motion or head nod to support messaging related to vaccine recommendation or following certain protocols, whatever they might be, I would be happy to start working on that with our crisis communications team again.
How does everyone feel? Head nods.
You better get the sport code out again.
Yeah, yeah, right. I'm gonna recruit you to do one, Andy. Thanks, Dana. Anything else to report on?
Not tonight.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to item 10A. I'm gonna go ahead and motion to approve or appoint Sandra Cooper to the Whitefish Housing Authority, which was a recommendation by the Housing Authority Board, and her term will end 12/31/2022. Just need to have a showing of hands ratifying that appointment. And Rebecca? That's okay. And that's unanimous, Michelle. Welcome, Sandra. And you also have a letter enclosed in the packet from Doug Rochalt. Any comments on the letter? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead with councilor comments, and why don't we start with Rebecca tonight, if you're ready.
I don't have much to say other than this is probably the worst time of our COVID pandemic, because now the children are really getting sick because Delta is affecting them, and there's a new variant called MU that's from Colombia, and they're thinking that one doesn't, the vaccines won't work on it. And so every time the Delta mutates, it's every 2 weeks. So it does matter if people wear a mask in public, and if you distance, if you wash your hands, all the same stuff we've been doing for a year and a half. But now the stakes are higher because the children are getting sick, and in the past, I know people that have long COVID in their children, and it's very difficult to find doctors to treat them because it's a multi-system disease. But now they're dying. And so we are responsible for what we create here, and I just hope that people can get over the defiance and get over their doubts and actually protect each other in our community. We're seeing more and more businesses downtown closing, more staffing issues. I mean, and this is just the beginning of our season, so it's pretty dire.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben?
I will use my comments today to address our work session from before.
Please.
I'm going to start with enforcement. So I heard 5 ideas that came out during our discussion regarding enforcement that I thought were good. Number 1 was to change to the 90-day term for leases. I know we've talked about that before, but I still think that's something to do. Number 2, to require the license number and in all advertising for the rentals. We've also talked about that before. Number 3, hiring an external firm for enforcement. I know Andy brought that up. Or maybe putting an RFP out, or somehow helping our planning staff and building staff, which is already way overloaded, to deal with the burden of enforcing the short-term rentals. Number 4, raising the fees of the rentals to cover the cost of the enforcement. So that's staff time, and that's this third party that I mentioned above. And then number 5 was the 3 strikes program that we heard from Erica out here today. So those 5 items, to me, I'm going to wrap those up in a box. I'm going to call those enforcement. I'm going to say those seem like no-brainers to me. And, I think these are things that we should probably already be doing, really, and I think we should move forward with them now, in my opinion. But I'm also going to say, at the same time, I think that's the second most important thing we were talking about here today, because I don't think that enforcement is actually going to solve the problems in our town, because what I heard here was the thing that keeps coming back in my mind is over-visitation. And, I mean, look at the numbers in Dylan Boyle's letter. They're astounding. There's twice as many beds here in town to stay in for visitors as there was just a couple years ago, just from short-term rentals. And that's, of course, that's going to cause things to change. And we have, I mean, I'm right there with them. It feels to me like there is just so many people here this summer that it strains our businesses, it strains our infrastructure, it's causing people to drive on our roads a lot more. We've got 20,000 people watching concerts. I mean, it's a lot. And I think that is extremely concerning to me as a resident, and I think I know a lot of people that I've talked to. And I also think it has a lot of collateral impacts to our community in the form of housing and traffic and other things as well. So the problem is, I don't know what to do about it. I mean, we have the idea of the moratorium, and I think I agree, if we have a moratorium, it should be towards a goal, or it should be something we can do at the end of this moratorium to help fix this problem, and I'm still struggling with what that is. And we heard from our city attorney that caps may be completely unworkable. I don't even disagree with that. I think it's very hard. I would be interested if there was a way to do that. The other big one to me is fees. If there was some way to have the cost of the short-term rentals and the economy of the short-term rentals help pay for our affordable housing problem. I mean, if there's a couple hundred, how many we got? 272 licensed rentals? No, it's higher. It's 700 and something units. I mean, if every one of those contributed $1,000 a year towards affordable housing in our town, we would be in a much better place. It would certainly help anyway. And so that's a long way of saying, if there is any way that we can do one of those two things, I think we should talk about it. I don't know that there is. I know we've heard repeatedly that we can't, so I would love some clarity or some plan in that respect to consider the moratorium. Absent that, if there's any better ideas, I'd love to hear it, but I just do think we need a plan, in my opinion, of what we're going to come out of it with. And I think the enforcement piece is almost like a whole separate thing. It's not even part of the conversation in my brain. So, thank you.
So, just to give staff some direction, I completely agree with wrapping up those points in a box and sending them on to staff if everyone else is in agreement with that in terms of enforcement. Are we seeing consensus there? Okay. And then what are people's thoughts on a moratorium while we're on the topic?
As long as we have a goal, like what are we going to do with that 90 days? And I mean, when it's over, we're going to be right back in the same boat. So part of me thinks we don't have any, we don't have to look out for the people who speculatively purchased property thinking that they were going to be able to build short-term rentals on it. That shouldn't be part of our decision-making process. At the same time, we have to respect what we did years ago in zoning certain things a certain way for a certain reason. So giving us some time to take a deep breath and think about it is fine, but I just don't know what we're going to do, and I guess that would be up to staff. But they're not going to have any extra time in a moratorium to do any more work than they would ordinarily, I don't think. It doesn't give them more time in the day to address this issue, does it?
No, it just pauses it where it is today,
Yeah.
and buys us some time, I think is the only advantage.
I could
And
live
I think
with
also
that.
if we're going to direct a moratorium and form a quote study group, I think we need to have some of the folks sitting up here volunteer their time to help staff work on that problem. And I'm sure Dylan Boyle and the Sustainable Tourism Committee, Lauren, for example, might be willing to donate her time as well. So I'm personally all in favor of a moratorium. I think we need to buy ourselves some time. I'm hearing it throughout town, and to Ben's point, our infrastructure is getting taxed to death, and we got to do something about it. Ryan? Andy?
Nothing. I mean, I guess I'll just comment a little bit on the moratorium thing. I share the same problem. I don't know what 90 days buys us. I don't know in 90 days how many are going to come in the door for a license. I think that of the 62.6% that aren't currently licensed, if we pass a moratorium and we say we're going to do it and it's going to take us a couple of weeks to get that done, we're probably going to see 30% of those come in for a license and maybe boot their renters out. That's a distinct possibility. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that, but what I can't come to grips with, and that's what I was trying to deal with a little earlier, it's like Dylan tells us Rhonda said 500, but I think his number was 487. We have 200 and some licensed, but yet if there's 500 out there that are actually operating based on air DNA, well, then there is some kind of problem out there that we're not licensing those people. And I think we set ourselves up, if we, in existing zones, I think taking away that right now, we just sign ourselves up for a lot of years of litigation is what we do. I mean, because properties have been purchased with the expectation, and we had a gentleman in here tonight, Daniel, telling us that's exactly why they bought property, and they're gonna build units because it's affordable now, because they can, rent them out. I think taking that away is a pretty classic case of taking in the court's eyes, and particularly the political state in this state today. I think maybe it was another time we would have been okay, or we just find ourselves right back down in Helena with another appellate court legislative bill coming through that guts what we're trying to do here one more time. And I guarantee you that's what we'll see. So while I think we might accomplish, I just don't know what we would accomplish. So I guess my thought is can we do it without doing a moratorium and really just find some solutions to the problem? And then if we see what a solution is and we say, hey, it's going to take us 90 or 180 days to get our act together to do this, then we institute a moratorium. But I would be opposed, if we don't have a direction, just doing it to do it, because all we're going to do is we're just going to stop, all we can prevent is the number of licenses issued. We're just going to say, okay, we're not going to issue any more licenses. Well, how many of those are actually going to come through the door in 90 days? If there's no pressure for them to come through, like a moratorium is going to get passed. So, that's just my thoughts. And that said, I don't not support the idea without an end game, or with an end game. I support it with an end game, but so, I don't know. That's it. Other than that, I have nothing. So.
Thanks, Andy. Frank?
I concur with Andy's analysis. My first reaction, John, is that, yeah, absolutely, we need a moratorium. To what end and to what effect, and could it, in fact, be effective? I'm not convinced it would, and I'm a little less concerned with potential litigation on a moratorium, but I think we just, I would support it, but I don't think it works at this point. And so I think we ought to take a look at the enforcement provisions, come back to us, get those enacted. And if we need to put together a task force to come up with some solutions, I'll play. And we're going to have to and maybe we need to hire a consultant given the other things going on, and I would be willing to do that today as a way to bring some urgency to the matter. Because I think what we've seen is, and the problem is that our staff, as now configured, doesn't have the time to do the enforcement and doesn't have the time to come up with what I'll call a creative solution to this problem. And so maybe we need to just say, okay, that's the cost of doing business if we're going to have short-term rentals around here. And I think we could add that as a cost for lack of a better description, or have staff costs or whatever it is, to what short-term rentals really cost and how we adjust their fees. And I think we could be aggressive about that in the interim, but that's my feeling. If everybody here said, let's do a moratorium just to do it, I would support it, but at the same time, I don't think that's going to get us where we want to go. So that's
Can I
my
just ask
feeling.
a question?
Thanks, Frank, yeah.
It seems like this discussion has moved to a question of livability in our town rather than just, I guess maybe I misunderstood the whole issue in the first place, potentially, but it seems like the issue that we're really focused on is affordable housing here. And does the short-term rental pool in legal areas really affect our long-term housing? Does it do that? Maybe that's the question we need to study if that's what we're after. I think it's a pretty clear case that it has affected our livability, particularly in the last couple of years. But if we're going to stop to address livability, I don't know what solutions we're going to come up with. The solutions that we need in terms of affordable housing is we need land, and I think Dana said this, we need land and we need money if we're gonna be able to build any affordable housing or provide it from the city level. And what we need is a revenue stream, and we haven't solved that problem yet. So that's, I guess, but back to my original question, is the moratorium about trying to study the livability and how the short-term rental stuff has affected our livability, or is it about how are we gonna get more workforce or affordable housing? So that's the question that I think we really need to dig in on.
Further comments?
John, I'll belabor it just one more time. Steve, to your question, my response to that is the questions that we're trying to answer here affect livability, and they are about livability. We need housing, permanent housing, for not just workforce, but for a number of other people to come and want to live here and be part of this community as opposed to simply a visitor in it. That's what I think we've got to try to figure out and focus on. And so I think it's a multi-phase approach to life, but I think what's brought us here is our inability to have affordable housing at any level for permanent residents. And I think that's a distinction that is worth observing, I think, to some degree. I mean, I know we're focused on it, but reasonably priced market level housing is also an issue, because the doctors and lawyers that are coming here, they're not, they walk in the front door, if they're out of med school, guess what? No matter how much money they're making, they cannot afford to buy a place here, given the way we've structured, or the way this market has structured itself. So I think we need to, I'm up for a holistic approach to this thing. I know, well, that's my point, a moratorium, but we won't solve it in any amount of days unless we start paying attention and do something about it now, and that means hire a damn consultant if we need to, and start working. I mean, we've got to put our nose back to the grindstone. I mean, I've been one of the first people to bitch about this thing, and everybody else here, but we just, at this point, we've got to say, okay, we're back to the drawing board, let's go do this. So that's my entreaty to all of us. So, there you go.
Thanks, Frank. Anything further from staff, Dana?
So to be clear.
Thank you.
No moratorium at this time. If there is desire, and that does come up in the future, I would recommend a special session, and we don't wait 2 weeks for the next council meeting. So if that ever does become a topic. Because again, like we see, what we've seen over just the past couple weeks with a committee recommending it, that people have made that step. I will, I think one thing we have to also put in perspective with this is that Whitefish is a desirable place to visit. Columbia Falls, the county, Kalispell, they're gonna have STRs. They will naturally rise the price of living in Whitefish. As people come here, it's a supply and demand thing. So we are up against a very large hurdle to address affordability based on short-term rentals. So I think, you know, and to be cautious, Idaho has a law that was passed that you can't regulate STRs at all. You can't treat them any different than residential uses. They're allowed in any residentially zoned place. So I think we have to be cautious that we have a legislature right now that would be willing to move toward those type of regulations. So just my 2 cents on that.
Good points.
That I think we should consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. I have nothing further. With that said, we are adjourned. Thanks.